post-secondary education to order. Before I proceed, we do have a new member on this subcommittee. I'd like to welcome Representative Derek Graham. He's been visiting with us in an unofficial role. Actually, he's with us over the interim, and now he's with us officially during session. Would you like to share a few words, Representative Graham?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm glad to be back officially as a member of this committee. As many of old heads know, I've been engaged in the educational community. Served as Budget Review Subcommittee Chair for K through 12. Was the Education Chair for about 6 years, almost 6 years. So I'm glad to be back in the field and working with our universities and working with you as well as the members of this committee. So thank you so much for your comments.
Thank you, Representative Graham. At this time, we'll have Amy call the roll.
Representative Fleming. Representative Flood. Representative Graham.
Here.
Representative McCool.
Here.
Representative Petrie. Representative Reed. Representative Huff. Chair Tipton.
Here. Do we have a quorum? We do not have a quorum at this time to do our minutes, so we will take care of that possibly later or at a future meeting. Our next item on the agenda is a presentation from the Kentucky Community and Technical College System. So President Zapata, please come to the table. If you have anybody with you, have them come as well. As I mentioned in the last meeting, we are following the precedent of our parent committee, the A&R committee, so that everyone who presents at the committee will be sworn in. So if you will please identify yourself for the record, and then I will swear you in, and then we can proceed.
Great. Thank you very much. Paul Zarapata, System President of the Kentucky Community and Technical College System.
And I'm Larry Ferguson. I'm Larry Ferguson, President of Ashland Community and Technical College.
Okay, please raise your right hands. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Now you may proceed with your presentation.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank the committee for having us today to share a little bit. We've been asked to speak about dual credit and to speak about performance-based funding.
Could you pull your microphones a little bit closer to you?
Sure. Is that better?
Yeah, that's much
Okay,
better.
great.
Thank you.
So I'll start off with dual credit. And let me... And I'll start off by saying KCTCS is a huge proponent of dual credit. It gives students the confidence that they can succeed in post-secondary education while they're in high school. And the dual credit courses can take place at a variety of locations, including high schools, area technology centers, career and technical centers, and then, of course, online as well. Is that? Okay, there we go. So KCTCS is the leading provider of dual credit across the Commonwealth, and we appreciate the opportunity to give students a head start in their college careers. As a matter of fact, some students get so far ahead in dual credit, they graduate high school with an associate's degree. So you can imagine the leg up that they get. Also gets them into the workforce faster. Over the last 5 years, the number of dual credit students that we have taught has risen by 90%. And so we are seeing that uptick keep coming. And then coupled with the drop in credential-seeking students due to COVID, high school students accounted for just over 30% of our enrollment in the fall of 21. And for the 2021 academic year, we had 20,701 dual credit students across all 16 of our colleges. And normally this would result in $27 million in tuition for KCTCS, but it didn't. Because in 2017, the General Assembly created the dual credit scholarship, and that mandated that the rate be charged at 33% of our tuition. This was moved up to 40% This was moved up to 40%, but what we are seeking here is not a change to the scholarship, but to move that up to 50%, which is very close to our break-even point. Our break-even point is roughly 55%. Moving it up to 50% would allow us to come closer to breaking even. And Larry, maybe you could talk about some of the expenses.
I can. As Dr. Zarapati said, the colleges are completely supportive of dual credit. We see the altruistic value in it. I'm one of those colleges that's fortunate to have every year from a local private school, students walk across who have done dual credit with us and earn an associate degree at 17 and 18 years old. So we see the great benefit to that. But from a business perspective, there are some things that make it a little challenging for us. There are additional costs to delivering dual credit. I'll give you one example. I have to fill a full-time position, roughly $69,000 a year for someone just to help coordinate dual credit with the 9 different school districts that I work with. And my state appropriations for my college, drilling it down to one college, Northeast Kentucky, is about 42% of my budget. So the rest of my budget is made up of tuition and fees. So when they're only paying 40% of the tuition rate of $179, which we have the lowest tuition rate per credit hour in the state. It does make it difficult for us. And as Dr. Zarapati said, we really have to be at around the 55%, not what we're asking for. This will just get us closer so that we're at a break-even point in the cost of delivering that instruction. Other ancillary costs that are associated with that, we have to pay the high school teachers who do meet SAC's COC accreditation standards who teach for us. Many times we have to send our own faculty into the high school because often they do not have faculty who meet those accreditation standards. So those add on additional cost for us as well. So it isn't necessarily free for us to deliver those services.
Yeah, I think another thing to add too is that in many cases our general education courses help pay for our technical courses, which are much more expensive to offer.
Well, an example of that would be I can teach an English course, so English 101, which I'm sure all of you have had, with an instructor can handle up to, not optimal, but up to 30 students in a classroom setting. If I have a technical course, so our career and technical education, which is critical for our workforce needs of the state, the average for that is around 15 students per instructor because this also applies to allied health and nursing, because of the intensive nature of that instruction and what they have to do in either a lab setting or in a clinical setting. So the costs automatically are double based on whether it's career and technical ed or it's a general education course.
Thank you. So again, this was increased to 40% in the 2020-2021 budget bill. And House Bill 85 would set the rate at 50% of the KCTCS tuition rate in statute, which will help promote financial clarity for students and the institutions. It would also eliminate the need for institutions to return 50% of the funds for unsuccessful course completions. This is the only scholarship that requires this. It would transfer the work-ready Kentucky Career and Technical Education dual credit language to the dual credit statute. And it would also maintain the current number of scholarship-funded courses for students, which is 10. It can be 2 CTE courses your freshman year, 2 CTE courses your sophomore year, and the 3 Gen Eds your junior year and 3 Gen Eds your senior year. And this is just a success story here of Mason Spencer. He was accepted for the pharmacy school, and he credits the dual credit program at Hazard for getting him so far so quickly. And again, this is a student that was able to prove to themselves that they could be successful in college courses while they were in high school. And, you know, it just is a great opportunity. Second part of our presentation I'm sorry.
Could we stop at this point
Sure.
and address the dual credit issue before we move on? And if any of the members have questions, please let staff know. Back in 2020, I did sponsor legislation to deal with this issue. Of course, we all remember what happened in the 2020 session. It was cut short, so the legislation did not go through. However, in the budget language process, we were able to do a little negotiating, and we got the rate set at 40% in budget language. It continued in the current budget year. We've done 2 one-year budgets. And it also went ahead and realigned the dual credit and the Kentucky Work Ready Scholarship and separated them just for clarity. And I am the sponsor of House Bill 85 in this year's session. It was scheduled to be heard in education on Tuesday. That meeting was canceled. I anticipate it will be heard next week. Just to give you a little background, there is legislation to address this, but I wanted KCTCS to come before our committee and explain to us the costs they have associated with the program and why they're asking for this increase to 50%. And it's not just KCTCS, it's any institution that offers a dual credit class. Do any of the members have any questions at this time? Representative McCool, please.
Get my little green light working there. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Not really a question. Just, I guess maybe so there is a question. Are you tracking the successfulness of the dual credit students? So at some point in time we can see, which I think is going to be very successful, but data would confirm that. The number of students who enter dual credit and the number who complete their associate and baccalaureate degree. Is there any process in looking at that?
We do have data
pathway?
on that. I don't have it handy, but we can certainly get it back to the committee.
Okay, I just think it'd be good to see that, and
Sure.
it will show. And I know personally, I've seen that very successful program. Students who graduate from high school with an associate's degree and go on to get a baccalaureate degree, saves money, saves time, and the whole process. So thank you for your work.
Seeing no further questions this time, please proceed to the performance-based funding part of the presentation.
Sure. So prior to performance funding, our 16 colleges had varying amounts of state funding. It was based on historical situations, geography, demographics. There was one single appropriation to the system, and then it was divided internally, but there was no performance metrics prior to performance-based funding being passed into law. Colleges in the coal counties were historically provided with more funding than the urban and non-coal areas. And so that's why, if you hear that the 6 coal colleges have been the losers in performance-based funding, there is some truth to that. And Larry is one of those, and I don't know if you'd like to add anything to that.
Well, we have been. I will say, I know Dr. Zarapata will explain more about where we are with performance-based funding, but there's not a metric in performance-based funding that I would not agree with or that we shouldn't be held accountable for. Not one. They're all significant metrics to see where we are performance-wise. But I'll just give one quick example. In the 1920 year, my college performed in virtually every one of those metrics, but we received no performance-based funding dollars. And that was just the nature of where we were because of where the funding was at before. And until some great work that we appreciated by the legislature this last time, giving us basically a floor for our base appropriations, kept us from losing money, even though we were theoretically improving in performance in all those metrics.
So if you look here at the state funding per full-time equivalent, KCTCS is at roughly $3,986 in comparison to the research universities and the regional universities. And that ranges from $9,888 per student at KSU, and of course we're at the bottom end of that with $3,986. When you look at our FTE enrollment for 2021, it was a little over or close to 41,000 students, most in the state. And then in 16-17, there was a method established for KCTCS to distribute these funds amongst all 16 of these colleges. And so, Wendell, if I'm correct, it's 22% of... 22.11. So 22% of all performance-based funding comes to KCTCS. That is then run through the performance model and distributed to the 16 colleges. The funding model establishes basically a baseline or an equilibrium that all of the colleges are essentially competing against one another and this equilibrium. And so the colleges, as I just mentioned, are competing against one another, and what has happened is because these 6 coal colleges had additional funds prior to moving into this performance-based funding, they can't climb up that hill. So these 6 are Ashland, here with Dr. Ferguson, Big Sandy, Hazard, Henderson, Madisonville, and Southeast have never received any performance-based funding. And the colleges have been required to redistribute their historical state funding in amounts ranging from $471,000 to $1.35 million, which I believe was at Hazard. Collectively, over $6.3 million has been reallocated from these coal area colleges to their sister colleges. And again, we're very thankful that that floor was put in to stop that from happening. So this just mentions that floor that came from the Post-Secondary Education Working Group that Representative Tipton was on, as well as Senator Givens. That was very well received by our 6 colleges to basically hold them harmless through this. However, as we noted earlier, because of where they're at in relation to the equilibrium, they're not going to get any performance-based funding dollars. In order to be funded at the equilibrium, and we're not asking for this, but nearly $64 million in additional recurring state funding would be needed. Keep in mind that none of the KCTCS colleges are overfunded as compared to its university counterparts. In the past, there's been some adjustments to the model for universities. There was a small school adjustment, I think 2 years ago, for KSU, Murray State, and Moorhead, and a catch-up appropriation for Northern Kentucky and Western Kentucky University. In 2023, the performance-based funding model is going to be reviewed again, and that's when we'd like to, propose some possible tweaks. It wouldn't change the allocation coming to KCTCS, but we could change the allocation amongst our colleges underneath that. So we will be working internally and, of course, working with this work group to try and come up with something so that we don't have the 6 coal colleges, quote unquote, as losers. Is there anything you would add, Larry?
No, I think you've covered it very well.
Well, thank you all for being here. And the reason that I asked you to present on this subject is Representative Prunty had reached out to me with the question about these community colleges, the coal colleges. And I think you have explained what has happened is prior to performance-based funding,
Yes.
they were being supplemented with additional dollars. So what happened is this term that I've had to come to understand called equilibrium.
Yes.
We had, if you may recall, we had the same situation with some of our other post-secondary institutions, Northern Kentucky, Western Kentucky primarily, because what had happened in the previous allocations, their allocations had stayed the same. Their student population had grown, but their historical allocation had stayed the same, so they were out of equilibrium. So if I understand what you're saying, because of these supplemental appropriations to the coal colleges, the non-coal colleges are out of equilibrium, and it's going to take the process. It's going to take some steps to get them in equilibrium, that every one of the 16 colleges can compete effectively in the model. Did I say that?
That's correct.
Okay.
And it's important because when you take those 6 colleges, if they're never going to get performance-based funding, it's a disincentive for them to be more creative, more successful, more strategic, and more innovative.
Okay.
And again, I think we can come up with some things that could potentially help rectify the situation when the working group gets back together.
Okay. Do you have any questions from the members at this time? Okay, well, thank you, and I certainly welcome your input. Appreciate your presentation today.
Thank you.
Next on our agenda, we have the University of Kentucky. President Capilouto, if you will come forward with your colleagues. And will everyone please identify yourself for the record?
Sure. Eli Capilouto, President of the University of Kentucky.
Nancy Cox, Vice President for Land Grant Engagement and Dean of Agriculture at the University of Kentucky.
Bart Harden, Director of Government Relations for the university.
Okay, will you please raise your right hand? Do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
Thank you so much. And President Capilouto, in light of the recent storms in western Kentucky and the damage that was done to our Princeton substation down there in the grain forage center, I asked you to come and kind of share a little bit about what happened down there and what the plan is to rebuild. It's a very tragic situation. It's a situation that's going to impact Kentucky agriculture. And it's going to take a while to work our way out of it. So I appreciate you being here and sharing with us about that as well as the other parts of your presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I want to start with my heartfelt thanks for all you do for our Commonwealth and for Kentucky's university, what I like to refer to us as the University of, for, and with Kentucky. Your investments, your partnership are critical to our endeavor to create a healthier, wealthier, and wiser Kentucky. So we deeply thank you. And I appreciate you raising the question about the tragedy that occurred in Princeton. I've also been asked to talk about asset preservation and bucks for brains. So I'm honored to be afforded this time. I like to look at this in another way. You've asked me how we're going to address rebuilding, revitalizing not only our campus, but communities throughout Kentucky. So we are committed to this, and I'll start first with our Princeton station. It was in December at our Board of Trustees meeting, just days after the storm, that I fully recalled a beautiful day in the fall of 2019 when we cut the ribbon on the new Grain and Forage Center for Excellence at Princeton Station. You made that day possible. You were adding to a foundation that's been in the making for nearly 100 years. That center was founded in 1925 on nearly 1,300 acres, just a short drive from outside of Princeton. And over the years, with your support and because of your support, that center and those scientists have been able to undertake some critical research, such as no-till research projects, precision agriculture application studies, cutting-edge research in plant disease and irrigation management, and another host of path-breaking studies that Dean Cox can certainly elaborate. Our specialists there are partners with our area farmers. They serve as resources for information and assistance on agronomics, forages, beef management, disease control, pest control, grain storage, soil fertility, and numerous other areas. So that's the way it looked on that fall day, and this is the way it looked just hours after that storm. We expect 41 of the 58 buildings at the center to be a complete loss. That totals tens of millions of dollars. But as all of us have learned over the last several weeks, the resilience and the resolve of the residents of Western Kentucky, and especially our people who work in this center to serve them, is not going to be diminished because of this storm. Carrie Knott, the director of the center, recently said, "We are not closing our doors. We might just look a little different and a bit more fragmented, but we do have a path forward. We don't know what it looks like, but we are here to support and we'll be there." So I want to make clear, we're not closing our doors. We do have a path forward, and we're going to be there for the people that Carrie and her colleagues wake up every morning to serve. So I'm lifted by this. Our local heroes proclaimed shortly after the storms, they wanted to make clear, make no mistake about it, as the sign says, we are rebuilding. And Vice President Cox and I will be on site next week to engage further these incredible, dedicated colleagues, and I wanted to turn to Dr. Cox now so that she could elaborate on this path forward.
Thank you, President Capilouto, and thanks, Chairman Tipton, for having us today. Since December 10th, we've spent a lot of time assessing damage together with insurance carriers and taking care of our people who didn't even have a place to put in their hours worked because there was no office and machine anymore to do that. So most of our people lost their normal workstation, and several others lost their homes, and 2 lost their homes that were living on the station. And so we are finding ways to continue the research and service we provide, as President Capilouto alluded to. So right now, in real time, we have crews in the process of removing debris, which will take some time. I would also like to note that some of the farmers that we serve and collaborate with were on our site by Saturday morning after the Friday storms, helping using their own equipment to remove debris. We are working with equipment suppliers to replace damaged equipment. We are focused on trying to clear the fields of debris so that we can do our normal planting and variety testing and research projects this spring. Also, we have established a rebuilding committee. We did that about the first week after the damage. And we have temporary office space for some staff with more office space on the way. So we'll be installing laboratories as well. So most of the center's team will be able to work. The outpouring of support from the community, the region, and the state has been incredible. In addition to the farmers that lent their men and equipment, we have had offers of office space from many of our university partners in the region and others as well. This all collectively hammers home the point that the Princeton Station is part of the fabric of the community and the region. And we very much appreciate that relationship, and we intend to keep it going. It won't change, and we will rebuild. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Cox, and I do look forward to traveling there with you next week. I remember on the day of that groundbreaking, meeting a farmer who could tell me how much that center had meant to his grandfather and his father, and from generation to generation, we've got to keep that asset viable and thriving.
President Capilouto, before you go off of this subject, I do have a comment, question or two.
Yes, sir.
And I'll make a comment. As a young boy, I remember in the early 1970s, I remember the first time we utilized no-till planting of corn. And it's my understanding that the Princeton Station was instrumental in that research, in developing that research, which is now a staple worldwide. And that's the kind of research that we're talking about. One question, was there any loss of life or injuries to any of the employees at the station?
I'm going to turn to Dean Cox. I feel confident there wasn't, but she knows more about what those families endured. There were some near misses.
Yes, there were a couple of people who were injured. One staff member was fairly severely injured when his house was destroyed off the Princeton campus. We also had a couple of employees that attempted to shelter in the Grain and Forage Center of Excellence. They came out okay with minor injuries. A couple of other people were living in homes that were destroyed, but they survived in the basement. So we were spared the devastating loss of life that many other counties experienced.
Well, that is a blessing. I would have a question about the way the center is insured. And I know many times it's been my experience when you take out insurance, as appreciation and property values go, where do you feel like the insurance coverage is going to be? Is there going to be a need for supplemental funds beyond the insurance coverage to get the center back to where it was before?
Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. We are still negotiating on a minute-by-minute basis with our insurance coverage, which is comprehensive, but you note a problem we have certainly thought about, things increasing construction costs, and we don't know how that's going to come out yet, but we're doing everything we can to maximize what we receive from the insurance coverage.
Well, as those needs come forward in the future, please let us know where you stand on that. So if anything needs to be done, we can take consideration to that.
Thank you, sir. We are preparing a kind of document with costs to get us from where we are now to when we get a new building. And that will involve some temporary offices and labs. And so we're compiling those figures now.
And just so the members know, I talked to Dean Cox about this before the meeting. We're talking about the Grain and Forage Center, but recently I've been hearing some discussion about a proposal for a new livestock center for excellence for the University of Kentucky. Could you elaborate a little bit on that and share with us, just in general, give us a brief overview and what the cost of that might be?
Yes. So we are partners in a kind of novel partnership with the Kentucky Cattlemen's Association. And that partnership is that we will allocate land on the Woodford County Farm in Versailles on Highway 60 for the cattlemen's office. And our memorandum of agreement with the cattlemen says that we'll also work on a project together. And that project together is really being handled by the cattlemen and the Kentucky Livestock Coalition. They're the project leaders, and we're project partners. And the project that we are going to work together, that we aim to work together on, is to move the UK Meat Lab facilities out to that site and design a pilot processing program to serve all the new beef producers and livestock processors and meat companies, so to speak, that have been afforded business in the state as we have moved to more local processing of livestock. So the Livestock Coalition has membership of all the grain commodities and the livestock commodities, and they are planning this project. My understanding is that it is a $50 million or more project, but again, we're the partner, not the leader. What we will bring to that is all the staff and expertise and extension programs that can be offered off of that facility.
So as a follow-up, and before I offer my follow-up question, I will share that I took live animal and carcass evaluation classes at UK, in probably the area you're talking about in the late 70s. So those facilities are quite old.
They have not changed substantially since you took your education there, sir.
Okay. Will there be a request for an appropriation from the General Assembly for this project?
My expectation, again, not as the project leader, my expectation is yes, and that discussions are ongoing about it.
Okay, well, thank you. I just want to let the members be aware that this concept was out there so we could be thinking about that in the future, and I appreciate your input on this. So, Mr. President, please proceed.
Chairman Tipton, thank you. Before I go into asset preservation, I tell our faculty I can detect what they care about by the questions they ask. And I would say that about the chairman, too. You first ask about people. You made a comment about no-till. And I have to say that day I was at Princeton when we cut the ribbon, and I mentioned that third-generation farmer. He told me what they could yield from an acre when his grandfather was a farmer and what he could yield. And I also have never forgotten how moved I was when he said, "We're not here just to feed Kentucky; we're here to feed the world." And so thank you for raising those points. I know you deeply care, and those questions certainly reveal so. So about asset preservation, we are gratified to understand the efforts you're making and the investments being contemplated for the renewal of some of the core facilities on our campus and throughout higher education in the state. The Council on Post-Secondary Education Study, conducted by the firm VFA, which is an outside entity, estimated that deferred maintenance at the University of Kentucky alone totals some $2.7 billion. The resources outlined in the budget you are considering would help us make a critical investment in buildings that directly support the success of our students and the service we provide in delivering the mission of the University of Kentucky. And we recognize this would be a partnership. We would provide 25% or 25 cents on the dollar as a match so that we could optimize the investments you'd be willing to make. So just a few of the projects we could particularly take on. I'll mention the Reynolds Building. It's a project with our College of Design. It includes the College of Agriculture, Food, and Environment as well. It's a partnership that will be helpful to our community, and it enjoys, thus far, strong philanthropic support. Our Kim Phys and Pence buildings. These are important classroom and workspaces in the heart of our campus. Funkhauser, this project would allow us to expand our College of Engineering to better meet Kentucky's workforce needs. And finally, our MDS and nursing building. It would be another project that would allow us to respond to the desperate need for additional nurses in our Commonwealth. And lastly, these aren't the most visible things when you drive through a campus, but the utility infrastructure, the building systems, those are the sort of skeleton and nervous system of a campus. Those always need support, and this would provide us a way to upgrade and modernize those. So what do these buildings represent? It's how we teach and educate our students. It's how we conduct research. It's how we partner with communities to improve the quality of life across our Commonwealth. We want to meet the needs of the state, its future workforce, and its health care, and these asset preservation funds would go a long way in our efforts to do so. Lastly, you asked me to talk about Bucks for Brains, and I want to reflect. Before I came to the University of Kentucky about 11 years ago, this Bucks for Brains program captured the attention in higher education across the country as an imaginative program. I think it was the envy of higher education across the United States. And at the University of Kentucky, it has been transformational. The endowment match program has been a remarkable catalyst for the dramatic and historic growth of the research initiatives at the University of Kentucky. So since the higher ed reforms of 1997 that birthed these, external grants and awards to the University of Kentucky, and this is just but one measure of our research engine, have grown from $122 million to $470 million annually. That's a 298% increase. And as of June 2021, we have some 210 faculty endowed chairs and professorships made possible through this endowment program. These resources have helped us hire and retain the talent and also build infrastructure so that we could provide healing, hope, and help in every corner of our Commonwealth. So in the time I have allotted, I'm going to give you just one example. This is a picture of Dr. Mark Evers. He's the director of the UK Markey Cancer Center. Bucks for Brains helped us bring Dr. Evers to Kentucky. There are 38 other faculty who work under the umbrella of the Markey Cancer Center that enjoy support through the Bucks for Brains program. So what has been the result of that investment? Today, Markey is a designated cancer center of excellence, the only one recognized by the National Cancer Institute. It means that Kentucky has one of the top cancer centers in the country. In fact, in each of the last 5 years, U.S. News and World Report has ranked the Markey Cancer Center among the top 50 in the United States. And it's not the rankings that really matter. It's really what the rankings signify. And that is lives saved, communities protected. So we so appreciate that support. Unfortunately, Kentucky still leads the country in cancer death rates. And that is a ranking we don't want to be a part of. And it's a ranking we can change. But it does take talent, infrastructure, capacity, and investment. Dr. Evers has a goal, and that's to cut cancer rates in half in Kentucky. Now, that is a big dream. And Bucks for Brains is an idea that can turn that dream into a reality. So that's what we have at UK. Thanks to Markey, thanks to people like Dr. Evers, and thanks to you in your support of programs like Bucks for Brains. We have similar investments, recruitments, and positive stories in the areas of aging and Alzheimer's, fine arts and equine research, cardiology and diabetes, literacy, and engineering, just to name a few. So think of what else we could do, and think of how those investments pay off forever if we could make additional investments in things like opioid or energy research, neurology and Parkinson's disease, to name just but a few. So this is what you have made possible. This is what our future can look like through this strong and continued partnership. Dean Cox, Bart and I are happy to answer any questions you might have, but I'd like to end with where I began, and that is with the deepest of thanks on behalf of a grateful University of Kentucky community, not only our campus, but all 120 counties, to our extension offices and other ways that we engage in partnerships with community. I've been coming here for 11 years. I tell people you have some of the hardest jobs in our state. You have to be experts in a variety of subjects and fields, and you come prepared every day with good questions and hard work to advance Kentucky, a place that we share in your affection. Every community, every hollow in this state deserves our support and attention, and with you, we're dedicated to being that helpful partner. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, President Capilouto, Dean Cox, Bart, appreciate you being here. One question I have, this is my 6th year serving as chairman of this subcommittee. This Bucks for Brains, asset preservation have been on the request all that time. Fortunately, we are in a situation where we have the economy has grown to the point, we've gone through COVID, all this. The matter is we have more resources to invest now than we have had in past sessions. Do you remember? Can you recall how long has it been since there's been an appropriation for Bucks to Brains?
Do you know, Bart, the last appropriation they started in certainly 98, I think it may have been 2002, 2006. Yeah.
So there was an initial investment, and I am well aware of the economic situation in the Commonwealth starting in 08 in that time period. So I'm very thankful that we've been able to provide an appropriation not only to UK, University of Louisville, and their research efforts. And you made a great point about asset preservation. You're getting a substantial amount of funds, but your need is still very great. So any members have any questions for Representative Fleming has a question.
Yes,
Thank
sir.
you, Mr. Chairman. I want to ask Dr. Cox a question because I got a question from a constituent about regenerative farming. could you educate me on that? If y'all are engaged to that, or y'all looking at that? My family's been in farming in Virginia for years, but obviously I haven't been involved directly. But there's a question that came from a constituent. And I just want to see what the status, or you can tell me about that.
Thank you. We do have some programs in kind of new types of farming. We are involved with several partnerships right now with companies that grow vegetables and other crops indoors in hydroponic systems that continually can operate. And we have some expertise in that area. It has not been a pillar of our efforts, but we're trying to respond to our constituents by increasing our programs.
Okay, and that involves promoting and keeping the soil as healthy as possible, and not go back to the same plot year after year, but let it recover and go through natural, and not have, I guess, different types of applications from chemicals and so forth.
Yes, yes, and we certainly have a lot of experts in soils, and we are increasingly trying to reduce our need for fertilizer application and to let soils rest. I didn't quite understand your question, but absolutely, we are experts in how to preserve soils.
Okay. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, 2008, 2010 was the last time bucks for brains were authorized. It was a total of $60 million at that time, 50 for the research institutions and 10 million for the regionals.
That would kind of line up when we had that economic downturn in 08 across the country. And I've seen the numbers, and I'm thinking the revenue to the Commonwealth dropped by about $1 billion in that time period. So it's taken a long time to grow out of that, and we're thankful that we're at a point now where we can start to read. Any other members have any questions at this time? Well, if not, thank you so much for your being here today, all the presenters. Appreciate your participation, and with that, the meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, sir.